You're watching HFO-TV, your partner in Pacific Northwest multifamily investing. HFO-TV is brought to you by Pacific Exteriors Northwest, apartment siding contractors with nearly 30 years of experience, providing exceptional quality and service to multifamily and residential owners. And by Gantry Incorporated, the nation's largest independent mortgage banking firm.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Today we have back with us Michael Anderson of Sightline Institute. He's the Director of Cities and Towns. Michael, thanks for coming back.
Glad to be here.
For people that haven't seen our other interviews, maybe give a little background on Sightline and what you do there. Then we'll talk about kind of what's been on your plate for the last couple months. So
yeah, sure. Sightline Institute is a sustainability think tank. We're 30 years old last year, and we cover the Pacific Northwest. So I've got colleagues in Seattle, in Anchorage, and Montana, in British Columbia, and
so you're international.
We are, yes.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, like the airports.
All right. Yes.
And so I'm on our housing team. That means that we're focused around letting people live closer to each other if they want to. When people live closer to each other, they cut their energy use in half without even noticing it, and we think that that's good. We can't get everybody to want to live closer to each other, but anybody who does want to live closer to each other and thus like voluntarily have this great savings for the environment, for the economy, for everything else, we think that's good.
So when you say you're, Northwest and, British, that's where you specialize your studies in, or what?
That's where we try to, we're trying to make the Pacific Northwest a global model of sustainability. We're one of the most prosperous and most ecologically sustainable parts of the world. We've got a great wealth of natural resources and beauty here.
Right.
And we'll only continue to have that if we can figure out a way to grow our economy without destroying it.
Gotcha.
So that's what we do.
Got it. Okay. And as I'm always as a think tank, as a definition, as opposed to like an economic group or something like that, does that mean do people hire you guys, or you do?
Yeah,
how does that?
We're a little unusual in that, so most of our funding is mostly from foundations and donors, and we don't do fee for service work for the most part. So mostly what we do is try to articulate public policies that we think are good for sustainability, that is, triple bottom line: energy, economy, environment, everything. Society, and or we try to actively influence laws and rules that we think will help do that.
For education for legislatures on policy making and things like that. So being that you're part of, on the director of kind of cities and towns and, housing, which is, where our industry is,
mm-hmm.
We've talked a little bit offline about inclusionary zoning that came in the city of Portland effective, was it February of 2017?
That's right.
You've talked about maybe looking at doing some changes with that within the state, or some policies that may be in place, kind of shine some light on where it's been and where it's going, and what do you think there could be some changes in that?
Yeah, so as I'm sure what a lot of your viewers know, the concept of inclusionary zoning is, at least as it exists here in Oregon, you require a certain percentage of the homes in a new market rate, market financed project to be sold or rented below market price, right? And affordable, right? Affordable to the person, guaranteed affordable to the person of a certain income band,
right?
And of course, there are 1,000 ways that can be more complicated. It's kind of a kludge anyway, but the effect of it and the desire is that you get mixed income buildings, and therefore mixed income neighborhoods, and people of different backgrounds know each other, and people who could otherwise not afford to live near their family or friends or job or school or whatever, they get a chance to. It all sounds great, and I think it comes from a perfectly reasonable and admirable goal. That's the sort of neighborhood we should want, in my view. Does it actually achieve that goal is another thing. And so like with all policies, you can have more and less successful policies at achieving their goals, and you can have different levels of achieving their goal. So I've tried to sort of steer the conversation away from what I've found to be a sort of non-productive, this is the best thing ever, this is the worst thing ever, to, well, if we want to have this policy, let's not take a position specifically at the moment on whether this is a good idea or not. Let's just say what kind of policy is going to work and what kind of policy is going to backfire. And by setting up a choice between having a working policy that tells the truth about its prices and its effects, right? Or pursuing other policies to achieve those goals. Like that's a more honest and I think healthy conversation than this sort of purely values-based symbolic battle between should this thing happen or should it not happen? Is it the best or is it the worst?
So, like in looking at what was in place, in the city of Portland,
Yeah.
I mean, reflecting back, it's been 7 years, or how do you judge that as a successful, not successful? How do you look at that policy as you're looking forward to maybe make changes or address it? What's your kind of take on that?
I think Portland's first attempt to implement it has been mostly not successful.
Okay.
There have been something like 1,000 homes permitted over that period
Right.
that meet the conditions of the program. But a lot of those homes, especially outside the central city, where it was a severely underfunded program,
Right.
were at 80% AMI, which is not that different from market rate. And so what you had is a bunch of people doing essentially market rate studios or the like small units that come in naturally at about that price and getting a tax abatement for it. That's great for that project, but it's really not a good use of our tax abatement, like public dollar, to make everybody do a bunch of paperwork and just have the unit come out at about the same price. So not to mention all the hassle that it takes to build a building when it has all these extra restrictions on it.
Right.
Again, for that very minimal public benefit. So you have a fairly modest number of these below market homes being created, certainly less than people hoped for at first. The reason for that is that so many people were bending over backwards to avoid the program, either building 19-unit buildings.
Right, because it only affects if you're 20 units and above.
The threshold is 20 units.
Right,
so then what
right.
happens is you had developers stopping at 18 or 19. You had people breaking buildings into several different buildings of that size on the same lot. You had people doing like an entire building of studios so that 20% of those units could be qualifying naturally. Or worst of all, you had people just walking away and investing elsewhere, right? And or the local developer failing to find an investment, even though they've got a good project. So which is like a lose-lose from everybody's perspective. Even if the only thing I care about is below market homes, even if I think that there's no benefit to a market rate home, I'm not getting any, right? 20% of zero is zero.
Right.
So that's the cost of an underfunded malfunctioning program, in my view, is that you're leaving a bunch of wins on the table that would be a win for everybody involved.
So was it the nuance of the program itself, or where do you think it was? It good intention, but as it works through the legislative process, that there's things that are put in and pulled out that just
right. It's always like that. So the process, as I understand it, as I watched it happen in 2016, 2017, when something like the city's under understandable intense pressure to do something about rising rents. Rents were going up really, really fast in 2015, 2016. We didn't have a housing bond yet. The electeds were getting primaried and knocked out because they didn't support rent control. And I think the city council really wanted to take some sort of action. And so that the city came out of the gate with a proposal was like, let's do the most the state allows us to do. We'll dial everything up to 11 or up to the maximum the state allows, right? Which is 20% of homes. The state actually requires it to be exactly 80% AMI as your price target, no higher, no lower right now. So 20% of homes at 80% AMI citywide, and that was sort of the starting goal.
I think was just for those units,
right? And then there was a discussion about and the folks in the real estate industry were like, "Whoa, those numbers do not work.
Right,
you're going to screw this all up." And even some of the folks who had been in the industry and supported the concept in principle when it was re-legalized at the state level, once it was implemented, they were like, no, that's not it. That's not the right way to do it. And so the city, to its credit, then tried to figure out a way to fund the program, to put together a package of tax abatements and fee breaks that would keep the project whole, that would cover those costs. But the county, speaking for the other jurisdictions that need to go in on a tax abatement program, wasn't willing to increase the size of the tax abatement. The city didn't line up enough different offsetting pay-fors to fully fund the program. And so what it did was it will fully fund it in the central city, which is where some of those 900 and some units have been permitted. But we won't fund it outside of the central city. And so you had all those malfunctions I described outside of the central city for the most part. These are like, many of them pretty high-priced neighborhoods, but you can see the contrast between Slabtown in Portland, where this, because of a previous deal, it was exempt from the program, period. And everywhere else, you can make a lot more investment happen in Slabtown than you could in other parts of the non-central city. Pretty desirable neighborhoods, lots of high-price homes, lots of people who would love to live there if they could afford it, but nothing being built, and the prices going up and up as a result of that shortage.
Did you think, looking at it, that legislators, within the city, I mean, a lot of it's turned over, but are they recognizing maybe that, great in theory, but if you're not getting any housing built, that's kind of defeats the purpose?
I think it's difficult for any government or any institution to see its own problems, right? Or to even to like take the time to look in the mirror, right? And so it was quite a journey, as I understand it, to convince the city that it needed to do what it always said it was going to do, which is check back in on the program.
Right.
So they said when they passed it in 2016, we will check back in on this in a few years. And then a few years passed, and they needed like emergency COVID relief money, so they pulled the money into that. Totally understandable in the circumstance, but also if that little amount of money to do the study is what it takes to the difference between your real estate market working and not working, then there are some hidden costs that you need to worry about. So finally in 2023 fiscal year, they got the money to do this study. They hired a consultant. They pulled together an advisory group. I was on that group along with a fair number of other folks, and both in and outside the industry, for-profit, nonprofit. And we looked at the numbers with the staff and the consultant and concluded the same thing that the study had concluded back in 2016, which was that the program was mostly fully funded downtown,
but nothing in the outlying,
not nearly enough everywhere else, or not everywhere else. In East Portland, the program was fully funded because there's such a small gap between market and controlled rents in the cheaper neighborhood. Nobody's building there anyway because there's such a small gap, right? But you had this big swath of the city between downtown and the lowest rent neighborhoods that were being poorly served by the program. So what we recommended was, on the rental side at least, you need to expand the tax abatement, basically quintuple that tax abatement, and make the project, the prototypical project is going to be whole with that expanded tax abatement. It slightly more than offsets the cost, that gap between the rent and controlled. When you calculate out the net present value of the benefits and the net present value of the losses,
the changes that were put in place.
That was what we did in Portland in the spring. So that has now taken effect, and I think the market, to the extent that the Portland market has any demand in it at all, it is responding. There's not a ton of demand. It's basically people who are betting that demand is coming back in the next few years. But those people are finding that it's easier to make their projects work than it was before.
Or it's not such a detriment having that other
exactly
program.
Right.
Now that doesn't
mean the program is a great idea.
It doesn't cover the added costs of construction and things like that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't mean that every project is going to work. That I would say that's not the IZ program's problem. The IZ program should just be trying to offset its own costs.
Right.
It doesn't mean that every IZ program is good, or that even if it were fully funded, that it is the right solution for every city. I don't think it is. I think it's the right solution, maybe, arguably, for cities with a bunch of administrative capacity like Portland. And it doesn't mean that it will remain fully funded indefinitely, right? So, like, part of the deal that the city and county made to fund that program is the county stepped up with a bunch of additional tax abatement, and the county basically said explicitly, look, nobody's building anything anyway, so this is no skin off our backs. Sure, we'll write some hypothetical tax abatement into this
thing.
Thinking
it's not going to be tapped anyway.
It's not going to be tapped anyway, or at least not tapped out. And in a few years, that conversation may be very different.
Right.
And one thing I hope for this program is, in a few years, when we have another conversation about it, can we have an honest conversation about, like, okay, that now actual money may be on the line, public money. We should not, like, defund the program but keep the mandate in, because then we're going to get the same
Result we had.
consequences. We're going to miss the next housing boom again. That there'll be the same lose-lose situation for everybody who wants the below-market units. However, we should have an honest conversation about what are the costs of this program, what are the benefits. If the public wants to have this program, this is what it costs. And if you do the math, because private development is more cost efficient than LIHTC development or publicly funded development, you can actually get those below market units in much cheaper than building a purpose-built building. That doesn't mean that we should never build purpose-built buildings.
You've got to have a balance of both.
But you need if what you're trying to I guess what I'm saying is it's not the worst use of tax dollars to give abatement to these projects,
right?
Even from a totally
if the goal
10,000 foot perspective.
If the goal is to increase the availability of affordable
below market housing, yes, exactly. Then this is a good way to do it. And the thing that does better than any other program, I would say, is it steers it specifically into desirable areas, because that's where the for market buildings are going up. That's the only place that's going to work, right?
Make sense. Right.
Whereas an affordable developer has to make a choice every time of do I want a higher cost per unit and endanger the fact that I'm even going to get a grant to do this project in the first place and put it in a nice neighborhood, or do I put it next to the freeway a long way from everybody these folks are likely to know?
Are there cities that have done inclusionary in the West, say in the Pacific Northwest, have done it and have had more success with it? Is it just a funding mechanism? Is it the uniqueness that we have with the county and the city having to work together?
Yeah. Inclusionary zoning does not have a great track record, and in part that is because very few inclusionary zoning programs around the country are funded. Okay. I would say there are.
So they're putting the regulation in, but they're not funding it in terms of when we say funding, giving the whatever, maybe the tax break or something like that,
right? Or something like that to keep the project whole. Otherwise, it's just undermining the value of the project. What wins in the economic battle is the current use. It's the car wash remains in place, and nobody gets to build the apartment building. So. I think it. There's I hear about Montgomery County in Maryland has had a program for a long time that is focused more on sort of lower density townhome type projects, and so they'll do townhomes that I think it's 110 AMI or something like that are mixed in, and that's part of the zoning allotment and so on. And when you're going from very low density to modest density, that's actually a very large percentage effect, and so I think it makes more sense potentially to sort of calculate the value of that, what's essentially a density bonus, right, on a very small scale. In the context of a Portland apartment building, a density bonus is just not that valuable right now because, you're losing money on, you can't make it up on volume when you're losing money on every unit, right? So the proposal that Sightline has floated for changes to the state's inclusionary zoning statute says this program programs in Oregon should demonstrate full funding, but in that calculation they shouldn't use the density bonuses. They can totally do a density bonus. That's perfectly fine, and as they do right now
as an incentive,
right? Exactly.
But require them to do not require,
but you can't say
full funding.
We're funding this by giving you a density bonus. That's not going to be useful to enough projects to make a difference, right?
Right. And is that pitch? Is it landing? Do people
I think
understand that? Okay.
Yeah. So right now, the both Oregon Smart Growth and the Community Alliance tenants have said they're supportive of this sort of compromise, and the folks I've talked to with the League of Cities and the individual cities are not opposed. And I'm still waiting on word from the city of Portland proper.
So would this be something through the state? Then
it would be a state change.
So then each city could do their own program.
Yeah, exactly, if they want to. So each city would have the chance, as they do right now, to have a local conversation. It's just that local conversation, I think, would be rooted in the numbers of what are the costs and benefits of this program, more than it would be about the ideology of
this inclusionary versus not doing it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to, good luck on getting it. As we've all known, the political fights can be very interesting, and you kind of hope it gets to just not, yes and no, and more about what is the goal, what's the best way to get that. I think there has been a recognition that what was done in 17 may have had good intentions, but the outcome,
and
wasn't great. You know, it didn't happen. You know, some of it was market, but some of it was.
There's a lot of consensus, even among cities outside of Portland, that's the case. So Portland's negative example is useful in helping tell the story of like how it is very possible. It's very easy. What I tell a lot of people is it's very easy to do these sort of programs wrong.
Right.
And I think everybody's able to hear that.
Well, you know, Portland likes to be the social experiment of the West Coast,
Sure.
so we all know that. So,
Sure.
Well, thank you for taking the time to share that. If people want to get more information, there's a website below where they can see kind of what your proposal is and what that looks like, and the timing of that is.
Still waiting to find out, but hopefully introduced in the next legislative
So the idea
session.
would be to get in the next legislature in 25 and see if we can get it mandated. Okay,
That's right. Well, and see if we can improve the sideboards around it. There would be no mandate. That's very important. We're definitely not in favor of mandating this.
But
policy.
It just says if you're going to
if you're going to do this policy, this is what it has to look like.
It needs to be funded, and
you need to keep checking in on it.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Michael, for taking the time for this. We'll see you again on HFO-TV.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.